We are so incredibly grateful to our speakers because they are all extremely busy, and I know that they have all put a huge amount of thought, wisdom and insight into their presentations. So to our first combination of speakers, we're really lucky to get 3 for 1 here. Our first speaker in this grouping is Rachel Tolan. She's worked in child and adolescent mental health for over 20 years and currently works at Royal Children's Hospital as the senior psychiatric nurse and in a clinical capacity in the mental health neurodevelopment team. Secondly, Kelly began her nursing career at RCH 16 years ago. Kelly Light is a paediatric nurse with experience spanning acute care, ambulatory care and NGO disability support. Currently, Kelly, as a master woman, is completing her Masters of Nursing, majoring in research. Therein, she has a keen interest in translating health research into clinical practice. And finally, Darren Pickering, also known as Daz, has been a nurse at RCH since 1991. Daz has been working in many areas across the hospital, including adolescent health and disability. Daz currently works as a clinical support nurse, helping nurses transition from adult nursing into paediatrics. He also has a passion for his own mental health and well-being and that of the people around him. So I will hand to our wonder speakers to start our afternoon. Thank you.
Hello everyone, we'll just get set up with our slides. So while we're starting, I just want to let you know that we've chosen to talk about our perspective of why mental health is everyone's business, probably more from a nursing perspective. I think when we started thinking about this, I just want you to think about the words that you hear in your own head when you hear the words mental health. And for me, working in mental health, it's a pretty quick slide to mental illness. So I had a quick Google search, and it actually reflected very much the same thing. There wasn't much on actually mental health. A lot of the links went straight to mental illness. Things like the search was 4 types of mental illness, 5 signs of mental illness. And this slide here probably represents the data that you'd see and the current data that I got from the ABS and Mindframe. So almost half of us will experience mental illness sometime in our life, which makes it very much everyone's business. Because if you think that 8.6 million people will experience it personally, I think it's really important to remember that the numbers there actually do represent the individual, but their families, carers, colleagues. So I don't think there's a person really, definitely in Australia, if not the world, that isn't touched in some way by mental health. And on the other side there is just some of the data. So depression is the 3rd highest disease burden in Australia, both personal and economic. Depression is now #1 chronic illness. It's actually topped other chronic illnesses. So I think what I want us to do now is actually park mental illness if we can, and actually really focus on mental health, because they're very different beasts, and we do need to have some discernment, because having or not having mental ill health or mental illness, it doesn't define a person whether you have or have not. And we do need to think beyond just treating mental illness. And although the definition of mental illness, it is moving away from the absence of mental health, as I saw from my search, it's still very much front and centre when we do think about mental health. So what is mental health? It is a key component, as Belinda said, of overall health. And who describes it as that it enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realise their abilities, learn and work well, and contribute to their communities. And I think this definition really struck me as, how do we understand that? Speaking to Tash, who's coming up next, speaking to Tash, she really helped me to highlight that it's about how the other person or the person themselves actually understands what's happening for them. And it's about, it really does include our emotional, psychological, and our social well-being, how we think, feel, and act. I've heard that term as the three-legged stool, how we think, feel, and act. So I found this and was really interested in how it can help us as nurses, which is our perspective, really think about the specific behaviour that we do see. And I love that idea that it's a dynamic state of internal equilibrium, and the dynamicism of it is really how we do maintain that. You know, do we have sufficient resilience against distress? Do we have the ability to empathise with others, and more importantly, can others empathise with us when we are feeling a bit off kilter? That we need basic cognitive and social skills to function in social roles, but they are actually basic skills, and one factor can offset another. And for example, the ability to empathise with somebody can compensate for cognitive impairments to maintain equilibrium. And that cognitive skills are about the ability to pay attention, organise information, problem solve. And social skills is that ability to communicate both verbally and non-verbally with others. So ability to be flexible and adaptable. How we can, especially, you know, through COVID, I don't think we can talk about mental health without mentioning COVID. You know, we've all felt that our emotional regulation has been really something that we've struggled with over the last couple of years, and how we actually express and moderate that with each other, at home, at work, and how we actually enable somebody to feel safe. And then that harmonious relationship between our body and mind is something that I think is really, really fundamental to mental health. I like to call it attaching the head to the body, and how we can do that more in our hospital. And then finally, Daz will talk about this a bit more later on, as will Kelly, is what you see is not actually something that we need to necessarily focus on. I think really asking that question, how do I understand what's happening for this person? You know, are they distressed? Are their values being honoured here? You know, if being open and objective is something that's really, really important to somebody, and you're in a context that doesn't support that, how can we expect somebody to sometimes act normally if the situation feels abnormal to them? And that's definitely a cultural factor that we really need to be mindful of. And fears is something that Daz will talk about a bit later on as well. We really need to honour the fact that, you know, people coming to the hospital can feel extremely scared and distressed for themselves and or for their children. So what we see is not always the story, and it's certainly not the story. Kel, I'll hand on to you.
Excuse us while we play musical chairs. So Rachel's touched on the connection between mental health and physical health, and that's what I'm going to have a look at further in these next few slides. When I was thinking about how I could link mental health and physical health, the first thing that came to mind is looking at a big study that came out in the 90s around adverse childhood experiences and the impact these have upon long-term mental health, physical health outcomes. So the study came from the States, and 17,461 adults were researched around their experience of childhood adversity, and the results were quite astounding. 67% had experienced one ACE, or adverse childhood experience, and one ACE equated to a score. Those who scored 4 or higher equated to 1 in 8 in the study. What does that mean for their physical well-being? And what health impacts does that carry? So for someone with a score of 4 or more, really significant health impacts, and Rachel's touched on depression. And these are only some of the astounding figures that came out of the study. If you had 7 or more ACEs, it was even more profound. And you could look at these and say, well, you know, these factor a lot around the social determinants of health and health behaviours, right? For people who did not partake in some risky health behaviours like smoking and drinking, poor diet, exercise, they still had increased risk of heart disease and increased risk of cancer. So these are childhood adversities that we're talking about. What impact must that have for a child and their development? So what they found in this study as well is that it had significant impacts neurologically on the developing brain around impulse control and executive function and how we function, which Rach has already touched on as well, our pain response and how this can be heightened, and also our reward center. Also, what comes out of this and what we see in practice is this heightened stress response and constant triggering of our sympathetic nervous system. So if you have high adversity and a lot going on that's causing a huge deal of stress, and that's going to have a significant impact as well. For developing children who are particularly sensitive to these stress responses, this is significant. It's neurological. It impacts their immune system, their endocrine system, and even the way that their DNA is transcribed. So when I had to think in preparing this for today around how I could look at mental well-being and its impact on health, ACEs made sense. But I also wanted to think about it in context for us as paediatric nurses, because the whole deal is mental health is everyone's business. So I wanted to put it a bit into context and talk around not only the baseline that people come with, all of this stuff that they carry, but the stress, as Rachel and Daz will talk to, of just walking in the door. And so to do that, I thought that I would take some research, bear with me, a lot of research here, around parental distress and what impact that has on healing for children. So this has come out of Queensland Health, and this study looked at whether or not parental distress delayed wound healing in burns. These were patients that were having silver dressings through outpatient clinics. So there were some variables like, having to have burns baths and grafting that were completely not part of this. And what they did is they had a look at a lot of health variables like body surface area, wound depth and size. They had a look at some social variables, and then they standardized those and had a look at whether or not parental distress impacted wound healing. And it did for 5% of this patient population. And for an additional 6%, procedural pain was directly correlated to delayed healing. And if we put that into context here at RCH, we see roughly 1,000 burns patients per annum. 11% would be 110 kids with delayed wound healing, so physical health impacts from mental health factors. So let's hypothesize what this might look like or try and quantify it somehow for our health service. If half of those kids were having weekly dressings and needed another 2 weeks, that would equal 122 extra dressings every year. Let's say that the other half were having those dressings every 3 days. That's an additional 256 dressings every year. This means an additional 366 dressings every year for these kids. And again, it's hard to determine which way to quantify this and how to capture what this could look like for us. But if we factor that these kids have procedural pain issues and that there's parental distress, and that's all very correlated, we could maybe hypothesize that a third of these kids could even need sedation. If that was the case, that would equal another 122 sedations a year. So whilst this quantifies what this might look like for a small patient cohort and for specialty clinics as far as interventions, it really doesn't quantify the hours of expertise for our clinic admin staff and nurses and our doctors, not to mention further referrals to allied health for scar management. It doesn't factor thousands and thousands of dollars worth of resources. Just dressings alone in this equation would equal more than 10 grand. But I think what was really quite telling for me, and in this context of a snapshot of why mental health is everyone's business, is that for this patient population, which is a patient population we see here, this percentage of children require more interventions because they themselves and their family have difficulty with interventions. And that to me is just a light bulb moment. It seems like that is why mental health is everyone's business and why it matters for us as paediatric clinicians. So to talk a little bit more around that, I'll throw over to Daz and we'll do musical chairs again.
Hey, alrighty. I guess I'm going to try and pull it all together and with my perspective on how we can make a difference to people's mental health and well-being as nurses or clinicians. I think at the end of the day, we owe looking after people's mental health to everybody, including ourselves. So when I started doing this, I had a little browse around the website and found in the mental health section for adolescents, there's a list of resources of people that can actively help young people with their mental health and well-being. These people included their families, their teachers, their friends, and the exciting thing for me was the other adults that they trust. And so, like light bulb moments that go off, that's us. We have a unique opportunity as nurses to make a positive difference and become an adult that these young people can trust. And that way we can have a great positive impact on their mental health and well-being, if we choose to. So when I say choose to, it is that thing that of wanting to help. We have to want to help. We have to want to make a difference. We have to want to be positive. Relationships are built on connections. We know that. We know that young people learn from experience predominantly. So let's make their admissions into hospital positive experiences. We need to honour their vulnerability. We need to, like that slide that Rach showed before, the fear factor, the fear of the unknown. You know, we're taking a young person out of their safe environment, if you like, and picking them up and putting them into an isolated area of a hospital that they don't know the rules, they don't know how things operate, they don't know how things work. Our role in that is to demystify that and let them understand, help them understand how things work and why we do what we do. Recognise that, yeah, they lose control when they come in the front door. They lose an element of control in their day-to-day lives, and young people thrive on control. So giving them back, empowering them to have some control back in their lives, their day-to-day stuff. Yes, there are things that we do as nurses, as interventions and tasks that we have to do at certain times. There's no getting away from that, but there are certain things or aspects of our young person's care that we can hand over to them. We can negotiate when they want to, have a shower. We can negotiate when, there's some medications we can negotiate. There are some cares that we can negotiate. So letting the young person have that element of control is going to make them feel better about themselves. They're going to be happier. Their family are then going to be happier. And then us as nurses are going to be happier. We're going to leave thinking that we've done a cracking job and we've made a difference, Validate those feelings and emotions. We talked about that. A sense of caring. Every admission into a hospital is an insult to anyone's mental health and well-being. There's no doubt about that. Myself had a motorbike accident recently and was an inpatient in hospital, and it's very interesting looking at the other side of the picture. And it was an insult on my own mental health. Not being able to see my dogs and my family and stuff like that was hard work. And we owe it to a young person to provide a safe space. Hospitals are cold, they're clinical, they're all those sorts of things, but the way we approach a young person, the way we talk to them, and the language we use, we need to be developmentally appropriate in our approach and just give them a safe physical space and a safe emotional space. Both are drastically important to good outcomes. And I think, role modelling our behaviour will help us with better outcomes as well. Role modelling through insight, empathy, all those things that we talked about. But it's also, we can impact a young person or a patient's mental health, but also our colleagues, our nurses, both old and young, the doctors, the nurses, the admin staff, the cleaning staff, everybody. We're all in this, we're all playing for the same team here. And I think it's that balance of nursing skills and attributes. So we talk about the attributes of nursing, the caring factor and all that sort of stuff. I think the balance has swung towards the more skills and the more task-orientated part of our nursing day. I would really love that pendulum to swing back to more the caring and the attribute stuff, or even somewhere hover in the middle there somewhere would be great. So it's not just what we do, it's how we do what we do that makes a huge difference to me. And it all just swings back to that slide that Rachel showed in the end. And I'll just flick over to my favourite slide, which is that one. And all of those things, I think, yes, there are dogs involved. I'm a dog person, but they all resonate with me and why we do what we do on a day-to-day basis. The last slide, I think Rachel just wanted to pop that one up. So from my point of view, here endeth the lesson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if I should tell you this, but collectively we've just heard from 67 years of clinical expertise combined.
Oh, no, don't.
What a privilege. And
Oh.
every word that you have all spoken is drawn from great wisdom and practice wisdom and evidence and expertise. So thank you all of you. Rachel, Kelly and Darren. And I love the little puppy prints. Thank you so much.